Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
And we are back. It was a big weekend for the Caden Philly family.
It was.
We had 2 birthdays this past weekend. Yesterday we had a massive, I would call it a massive workout birthday celebration, birthday celebration workout here at Functional Bodybuilding headquarters. How many people would you guess were in that gym?
30 at least?
Yeah. I was actually going to go more than that.
Really?
I'm going to pull up the
photos so you can gauge it.
Yeah, I mean,
there were lots of kids running around.
There were a lot of kids.
We almost had a muscle up
10.
disaster.
We did? Oh yeah, I almost booted a kid in the face. Yeah, there were easily 40. Definitely 40, including kids. So there were almost as many kids as there were adults.
But there were some kids working out. They were jumping rope.
Oh yeah,
it was so fun.
My nephew was getting after it yesterday. 13 years old.
He was like, I'm in Group C.
Yeah. Yeah, we did a little cardio mixed circuit, and it was good to see that. And then Jackson, who's in 3rd grade, was doing the workout too.
So fun.
Yeah. And he did the whole thing. I saw him like farmers carrying like the 20-pound kettlebells out in the, in the parking lot, and was just like going to failure, like slipping out of his hands.
Oh my God.
I wonder if those kids are, I should like text Clayton and see if he's sore today.
I'm sore.
Yeah. And then Clayton was like, hey, I really love that sweatshirt over there. Like, can I buy that? And I was like, I gave him one, and I was like, look, you don't have to pay me for it, but you have to promise. Like, I'm not raising no like weak ass, nephew. So you got to come back and work out more. He's like, oh yeah, I'm coming back.
Oh, that's so fun.
He was like we were doing like 200-meter runs, and he was just straight sprinting. I was like, pace yourself, buddy. We got another 40 minutes to go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But
I took the cardio easy.
Took it easy. I had a couple moments yesterday. I was doing like muscle ups in between some rowing.
Yeah.
And I was just like feeling so good. And I was like, oh man, CrossFit's easy. I can do this.
I was like, I did 30 pull-ups yesterday. No big deal.
Yeah. All right. Well, today we're going to talk about self-experimentation, which I got an interesting question on a podcast that I was a guest on recently, where it was like asking, what are your thoughts about like evidence-based or science-based? Like you seem to hold to a little bit of like a science-based approach to training. You talk about that periodically. And where does, self-experimentation come into play? Like the mentality of like, well, I tried all this on myself and it worked really well, and I can't, like, no one can refute that this worked for me. But then you maybe compare that to some literature, and then the literature says, oh, well, generally it doesn't work in this way. So I think it might be, before we go into like what self-experiments have we done and what have we learned from, it's important to like compare and contrast what scientific evidence is compared to self-experimentation, and the concept of N equals 1, which I'm sure people have heard and they don't necessarily know what that even means. Mm-hmm. So when you do like statistical analysis, like the number of subjects or the number of data points, is usually listed as N equals 10,000. So there's 10,000 participants in a study, right? So when you say N equals 1, it means like you did like a science experiment or study on one individual or one test subject, which is not, it's not a significant enough or amount of data to really be statistically significant.
Doesn't have statistical significance.
Yeah, but how does that actually impact scientific research? So anyway, I think that's a good place to start. But
I want to add something to that, if I may. There is a lot of validity to scientific research, and I really put a lot of stock in studies that are well structured and comprehensive in terms of reaching a significant number of people and trying to control the variables that can be controlled in order to really understand the effect of something.
Sure.
And at the same time, I think that scientific research is nuanced because there are 2 reasons that come to mind. The first for me is that some studies are funded by organizations or companies that have a vested interest in the outcome leaning one way or another. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something to be considered. And the second is that historically, a lot of studies, especially around health, are woefully inadequate when it comes to studying the effects of women.
Yeah, that's true. Because, a lot of, certainly in the exercise science field, these research labs that are around the country at big universities around the world, they have to get test subjects. And so oftentimes they're enlisting the volunteers that are generally in like the age 18 to 25 male. Sometimes they're trained individuals, most of the time they're untrained individuals. And that's how we base a lot of our, conclusive evidence about what works in strength training, for example. And the same could be said for nutrition studies that have been done, but you have to look at those things very closely. And then, which I think really, when you look at social media, you'll hear a lot of people saying like, well, I don't, I'm not this study is not representative of me. I've been training for 20 years and this is the style of training that I use. This is what's worked for me. And these were, this study posted some conclusive, results about lifting, but they only tested subjects that were between 20 and 25 and had never lifted a weight before in their life. So perhaps, that person isn't like me, right? And yes, there is research bias that happens, even though you might assume that researchers are, looking for truth, and oftentimes they're not necessarily looking for truth. They're looking for specific outcomes that align with their agenda or with the companies and the governments that fund them. So that's just something you have to be careful of. And then the other thing is like this, self-experimentation. Like most people, where does someone get a hypothesis that like they want to go and test? Hey, I think that we should go test lengthened partials as a more effective means of getting better hypertrophy in muscle tissue. Right? That's a hot topic lately. Who had that idea and why did they think that was a good idea? Well, you probably had, a handful of independent thinkers out there that were like, hey, in my experience of training, because I track my own personal experiments very closely, when I trained to full range of motion, I got better results than when I trained partial range of motion. So what's the difference? Well, when I trained full range of motion, I was getting those big lengthened contractions. And then they're like, well, what if I just did lengthened contractions or more lengthened partials? Oh, in my experience, when I do more of those and I go to failure, I got even better results. And so this is one person having one experiment on themselves, and they thought, based upon their experience, right? It's like, this is anecdotal evidence. It's like, I had better results. Okay, well, now this is a thought that we have to go and test in a more controlled environment, like a proper research study. And we won't go into like the various types of research that's out there. There's a great book called Flexible Dieting by Alan Aragon, who's one of like the, main people in the science-based nutrition and lifting community out there, and does a really good job evaluating research. He details the different types of research in that book, so that if you want to be a more educated consumer of studies, it's a great thing to go and read. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you have to have like a reason to go and test something and like organize a funded study with a lot of subjects. I mean, to get a study from start to finish, there's planning, there's, you have to have massive good method. It's a massive effort. And so you don't want to just go test random stuff. You test something based upon like, okay, either my knowledge of physiology or biochemistry or, some observational study that you had, or a self-experimentation leads me to believe that there's something here and we should go test it.
Yep.
And, there's a lot of great ideas out there that have never been tested because they don't get funding, right? So anyway, I've been self-experimenting since, really early on, just taking ideas that I've heard or read about and applying them to myself, and then saying, okay, well, this has had a lot of significance in my life, either positive or negative, and therefore I want to share that with other people. And that's how I have built the vast majority of my coaching knowledge and practices that we've shared on functional bodybuilding on this podcast. And so that drives so much of what I do. And then there are good studies that come out that sometimes confirm what I already believed or refute something that I thought was really important. And I have had to swallow some tough pills and be like, oh, that actually doesn't really matter. Or maybe the way I explained that in the past was incorrect. Like I have a really good example of this from just recently, but it's like, hey, this thing that I thought was really important for this reason was actually not important for that reason. It was important for another reason. So it's still important, but I was just educating about it a little bit incorrectly.
Can we hear what that was and how that came to be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was just, we just did a reaction video on that last week. It was this idea of like tempo training, tempo resistance training. Like why is tempo important? Why is, why is slowing down your eccentrics or the lowering phase of an exercise important? For a lot of years, like and this was like the knowledge and the wisdom was when you're lowering a weight, you're under load. So you're lifting against the load, but you're doing it through a stretching, you're not contracting the muscle shorter, the muscle is lengthening. So as muscle lengthens, like the way muscle contracts is there's these fibers, these filaments that overlap each other, and they kind of tighten up and crawl together and get shorter. And then when you stretch them, those attachments between the filaments start to kind of, under tension. The thought was like, okay, they're ripping and breaking apart. You're kind of like causing muscle damage while you're, extending or stretching a muscle under tension. And it's that breakdown of the tissue that causes it to grow. So if you do longer, slower contractions, you're going to get more of that ripping. You're going to get more of that muscle breakdown, which is going to help enhance muscle hypertrophy or muscle growth or even strength, right? So slow down for more hypertrophy. And that was kind of the message, like, hey, we do lots of tempo training at Functional Bodybuilding. And one of the reasons that we talk about it for a long time is it promotes more muscle growth for that mechanism. And what the research then found, in the past 5 to 10 years is that it's actually not that true. You can lift fast reps, you can lift slow reps, you can lift high reps, you can lift low reps, you can lift heavy, you can lift light. So long as you take the sets to failure, you get about equal muscle growth across all of these different methods. So that slow eccentrics are not important for hypertrophy specifically. However, they're very important for another thing that leads to muscle growth. They're important for consistency in training by way of keeping you more controlled and safe. So when you move slowly through a range of motion, you have for pretty much everybody, specifically beginners and intermediate athletes, you have a much better chance of having good technique because your brain has to catch up to the speed of movement, right? So, top athletes in the world can move at crazy speeds with precision. You see somebody who's like at an NFL combine doing some agility drill and they're moving crazy fast, they're cutting, they're weaving, they're doing all this stuff on the field. Take somebody who's off the couch and tell them to go run one of these agility drills as fast as they can. It looks like an out of control vehicle that's about to crash into a wall, right? So translate that to lifting. Somebody who's a beginner is lifting super fast weights. Their mind, muscle, joint control, body awareness is just so underdeveloped that there's a really good likelihood that they're going to get into an unsafe position with a lot of load and they're going to get hurt. And when you get hurt, guess what happens? You can't train. And when you can't train, your muscle doesn't get stronger and you get more out of shape. So tempo becomes this really valuable tool to get people lifting under control. And it's a good way to help people achieve high intensity without sacrificing technique or ego, to like make them want to lift too heavy. And so that ultimately becomes the principal reason why we use tempo training. And it's still very valid and it's still very applicable. But if I'm an advanced athlete and I have good control and I can get great contraction and stay safe, then I might need to do a 2-second lowering on an exercise to get the best, safest stimulus, whereas somebody else needs to lower it in 3 to 4 seconds with, twice the amount of, half the amount of speed as me in order for them to stay in control. So, tempos are guides to safe movement, and it can really vary from person to person what's the most optimal tempo for them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to point out a couple things here. So just going into the big picture of what makes a successful self-experiment, or how does one, come about a hypothesis, or what is like the best way to approach going into a period of time where you're trying something out to learn as much as you can from it. I think that you have very particular qualities that make you a really great self-experimenter, and also someone who is good at evaluating scientific data. And so one is being very diligent about how you approach things and doing them for long enough with enough controlled variables to not be changing everything at once. Also tracking your data very closely. But the one that comes to mind as you're saying this especially is open-mindedness to being wrong and like open-mindedness to things evolving. It's not like, you're flat out wrong in the value of tempo. It's just, that was different than how I was thinking about it before.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you are going into a process of learning, that's so crucial to not let your own initial bias close you off from something that can potentially be uncovered in the process. Yeah,
I think about it like, people who wake up and they drink water with a squeeze of lemon in it and a pinch of salt. And like that's their morning cocktail. And they're like, for the longest time, it's like, yeah, this is great for like balancing your pH, right? Now, I'm not saying this is true or not, but what is like, and they're like, I'm balancing my pH. That's why this thing is so important. And I've experienced benefits from it. Well, maybe like a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, we find out like the lemon juice does nothing to balance your pH. It doesn't do anything. But what it does do is you believe that this is important, so you did it every day, and guess what? You woke up every single day and you hydrated and you got electrolytes in your system, which helped improve your digestion, which helped improve your mental clarity and your energy and all those things. And so really all you need to do is just wake up and drink a glass of water and you're good to go, right? And if you don't like the taste of salty lemon water, then have an element, or, have something that tastes better, right?
Yeah.
Or wake up and drink, a liter of Diet Coke and guess what? You just got hydrated. It's like, and you got a little caffeine. Like, it just helps us to later on maybe pinpoint why the thing is important, which has happened to me many, many times where it's like, I really thought this was the thing that I needed to do because I felt so good doing it. And then over time, I found out that like I put so many constraints and restrictions on what I had to do when really the only thing that was important was that I just ate 80 grams of carbs. Like it didn't matter where it came from. I just needed carbs at that time or something like that.
Yeah.
I think also like self-awareness is super important when you're doing self-experimentation. Like you have to, data is important. Controlling variables is important. Being open-minded, those three things that you said, but you have to have like a really keen sense of like your body and like when things feel one way or another. You do have to kind of go, you have to, there's a lot of feelings that come into that, which feelings are not as important as data. But if you're just completely unaware, which, I think that happens to a lot of individuals who don't treat their body consistently very well, is, they don't have, they can't really sense subtle changes. They only sense big dramatic changes. And so if they could be going for 2 weeks doing a protocol to try and lose weight and they don't see the weight drop off. But in those first 2 weeks, there were a lot of other things that were happening that they were just not very self-aware of. And it's like, there was a lot of good things happening that you just didn't pay attention to. And therefore you gave up too soon before you could let the thing work.
Yeah. Yeah. So making sure that you give it long enough too.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other self-experiments that you've done that have been notable for you?
Yeah, self-experiments were, I'll stick to like the last 7 years. I'm trying to go 7 because that takes us like before COVID and then after COVID. But like there was a period, and 7 years ago or 6 years ago is when I started to track macros closely. So there was like eating just based on food quality and a general understanding of like where protein and carbohydrates come from. And doing that for probably 10 years as like a CrossFit athlete, and in the years post competing, that was kind of my approach. I followed strict meal plans when I was much younger, which were macro.
A form of macro.
It's a form of macro, but macro controlled by just eating the same thing every day for months and months at a time, which I don't really recommend for a lot of people unless it's their first approach and the only way that they can organize themselves. So yeah, getting into macro counting, that was a huge self-experiment. Also going from a very low carb to a high carb approach in my way of eating. So like low carb, high fat versus high carb, low fat. What has been the difference? I did, my animal-based experiment for about 6 months where, I just did all the things, and from eating only foods that were either animal products or fruit. There was really nothing in between. There was no grains. There were no vegetables. During that time, I ate a lot of fermented dairy. I ate a fair amount of organ meat, lots of red meat. That was another one. I think experimenting with a very, like earlier this year, a very high volume bodybuilding split, training split. Of course, doing a 2-year, really almost like a 2-year experiment of just weight training and walking for my entire fitness protocol, as compared to lifting, doing Metcons, riding, mountain biking. So doing more of like a mixture of various different disciplines in fitness. Those are the big ones that really come to mind. Are there any that you can recall that?
The only other one I was thinking of is walking significantly more than you had been. I think you got your steps up to like 18,000 on average a day or something. Yeah. There was that was 2024. I think my average step count by the end of the year tracked every day was like 18,000 something. So as compared to like maybe this year, it's probably down to like 12 or 13,000. And then years before that, I don't think I had really accurate step counts. I probably started really tracking my steps closely in 2023. Yeah.
Prior to that, I was doing a lot of walking, but not really tracking it closely and not really using that as a metric that I, held myself accountable to. But I had done enough in that time period to be like, hey, this is an important thing that I'm like, that I can see, my step counts went up dramatically during the years that followed COVID when we were, not in normal life rhythms. And I saw dramatic improvements to a lot of, body composition, general feeling, stress reduction from being outside more. I was like, oh, this is important. Let me go into this and track it. And then as I tend to do with things that I'm like, oh, this thing is working, I should just do more of it. And that'll always be better. So I'm going to go lowish carb. Oh, wow, I'm seeing some results. So I'm going to just drop my carbs down to like 75 grams a day and just eat fat and protein. And then, I tend to do that once I've established like a period of like, hey, this is working. Let me push it to an extreme. And most times the extremes tend to have negative consequences that make me come back towards the middle. Always come back towards the middle. Yeah.
And what are some things that have surprised you the most over those experiments?
I think one that really, I think going and starting to track my macros back in 2019 was just a huge eye opener. It was, it certainly made me really regret not doing that in my early days as a CrossFit competitor. I missed, I think probably, who knows how I could like quantify the percentage of opportunity that was missed in terms of my performance and my recovery and my outcomes in the sport. But I would definitely say it was probably one of the biggest things that I missed out on. Because I wasn't like chronically underfed during CrossFit years, except for the first two and a half years of competing, when I used to eat really low carb as a paleo athlete who was afraid of anything, really afraid of carbs and sugars. That really set me back. But once I started to adopt like a higher carb, moderate fat, high protein approach to eating for performance and recovery in my last 3 to 4 years of CrossFit, competitive CrossFit, I wasn't under eating, in entirety, but there were days where I would undereat and then days where I would overeat. And so I would have these like big fluctuations in calories throughout the week and throughout the month. And had I been more consistent day to day by actually having by measuring it more, I feel pretty confident that I would have improved a lot of my recovery in the hardest days of training of the week. So I generally would like train really hard from Monday through Friday. I'd train on Saturdays, but like Monday through Friday were busy days because I was working full time and training full time, and I would just undereat.
Yeah.
Because I was just eating clean foods and getting the right foods, but I feel confident that I wasn't, spreading out my nutrients throughout each day adequately. Mm-hmm. And therefore, come Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I was under recovered, and those training sessions would be lower quality. And if you add that up over 4 years, 52 weeks a year, that's 150 sessions potentially a year that were not optimal over 4 years. Like you got 600 training sessions that I didn't fuel perfectly or the best way I could have. And then I'd always make it up on the weekends. I'd have refeed days, whatever. And could that have made an impact to my, my career? For sure. I think it definitely should have. So that's one. And that's why, I still to this day am tracking my food. It's a staple in how I coach people to build that level of awareness. And whether they track forever or they just track for a period of 6 to 12 months to really ingrain some of those principles, I sort of say just dedicate that time, and what you learn in that period of time and what it does for your body will dictate whether you feel the need to continue to do that or the desire to continue to do it for, beyond that. So that was big. I think another big one was going through my various lower carb cycles and seeing how much it really impacted my performance, or like my ability to feel as much energy as I could feel, not just in my training, but day to day. That was a big eye opener. And I did it at a time where I did it for a period of time where it got me incredible body composition results. And then I did it for a period of time where my body composition results were medium, not particularly great.
Mid, as the kids would say.
Mid, as the kids would say. But every time I went back to a more like high carb approach, I just have felt like I get more out of the thing that matters so much to me, which is movement and training.
Yeah.
Of course, the other one that was we both forgot to mention was my intermittent fasting period.
Oh, I mean, there's been so many. Vertical diet.
Yeah, but the intermittent fasting one
fasting was big.
That was a tremendously impactful period of time, which I learned a lot of really important things, but also became, a slave to the clock.
Yeah.
And put myself through a lot of stress. And that just was certainly, in hindsight, unnecessary. This was like a period of time where I thought the secret sauce was in the fasting windows, which later got very debunked by science. And it was those research studies that started to come out that helped me to feel okay letting go of this thing I had attributed to most of my success, but I was like, oh, this isn't where I got my success from. And the only reason I was able to implement it in the first place was because it was post-COVID. We were locked down. It was basically a year where there were life was exactly the same every day. There was really no
social pressures.
There was no social pressures. There was, we had very little kids that were basically babies, and they didn't, they were in bed by 7:30 every night. Like, I could stop my meals at a certain time of day, and it didn't disrupt family time whatsoever. I could really manipulate my own eating windows. But it ended up creating a lot of stress when we got back to normal living, and I was like stuck in this probably 6 to 12 month period of being like, I need this thing, but it doesn't fit in my life, but I need this thing, and it's what's made all this impact. And then it was like, oh, actually, you know what? What has made the impact? There's something else that's going on here, and that there is no secret sauce to fasting that really is creating all of what I am deeming, important outcomes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you've been wearing your Whoop again lately,
mm-hmm.
and I thought it'd be interesting to touch on the role of technology and devices and what's been useful for you in terms of the actual things that you track to learn when you're self-experimenting.
Yeah. I mean, the Whoop has been, I've had a mixed relationship with it over the years.
Same.
I was actually one of the first adopters. Like,
me too.
Yeah. It was like 2000 and maybe
17 or 18.
It may have been even earlier than that, because I remember they were doing some beta testing, and they had sent them out to a bunch of like.
Yeah, you were early.
Yeah, I was wearing it back when I was still working with Mike Lee and training for the games.
Wow.
So I had one back then, and I got really, focused on my recovery scores as it related to like my readiness for training hard, training to compete. And then it wasn't until like maybe much later on that I started to really look at some of the health scores and like my the absolute value of my HRV, and was that getting better? And there was a period of time where it was like, I loved my Whoop because it was telling me the things I wanted to hear, and things were going really well. And then there was a period of time after that where my, lifestyle, stress, work, things just got in the way of me having the best possible health outcomes. And I started to see my, Whoop scores go down and down and down over months. And I started to get really frustrated by, like this reminder every day that like I'm not living optimally, and I didn't see a way to make an adjustment. And so at that point I took the Whoop off. This was like 2 years ago, and was just like, you know what? This season of life right now is really tough for me, and I don't like getting daily reminders that I'm not optimizing in every place possible when that's my nature to want to do that was like a really big psychological hurdle. And I took it off, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the things that I can control, the data points that I can control. Am I getting my steps? Am I eating my food? Am I getting my training sessions in? Am I getting to bed at a reasonable hour? Whether my HRV is up or down, and I also needed to de-stress, like by taking out a lot of my, aerobic activity. And as I think most people will find, if you are not doing a lot of aerobic activity, your Whoop scores will not be super favorable, right? So I saw my HRV slowly start to go down. I saw my resting heart rate not be as low as it had been in the past. I started to see some things that just like bummed me out. But then more recently, I was like, okay, well, I think I've gotten a little bit too complacent in some areas, and I need accountability. I don't care whether the scores are, good, bad, or whatever. It's like, I just want to get honest with myself. And so that's when I decided to like re-engage in the Whoop and put it on. And I'm only like a month in, so I'm really just collecting data and just sort of seeing like sort of staging some, of my next experiments that I'm going to go through. One of which I've already started to like build again, which is my cardiovascular fitness. And again, this is not like general rules. Like you need to be doing more cardio, otherwise your Whoop scores are going to suck. Like I'm not saying that whatsoever. There's a lot of people that are going to see massive improved health outcomes by focusing more on resistance training in their diet and sleep quality. And they're going to just see their HRV scores like improve and their health, the recovery scores and all those things improve on their wearable without having to like kill themselves with cardio or anything like that. So that's one of the more recent things that I'm starting to, get a little bit more honest about and reintroduce. Yeah.
Well, what would you recommend for people if they are interested in self-experimenting?
If you're not somebody who lives and breathes this stuff every day and thinks about it all the time, then I think it's best to do self-experimentation with guidance from somebody, right? So somebody will tell you like, hey, this is, in my, and that's why we have this podcast. That's why we have, we do what we do. It's like in our experience, in my experience, this is the pattern that I've recognized amongst thousands of people. This has the best, chance of a positive outcome. So take this thing and go try it. And this is how you should try it. And then that becomes a self-experiment. It's like, okay, the experiment is tracking your protein every day for, a month and measuring it and logging it into a nutrition app.
Yeah.
That's an experiment, it's like, hey, you've been doing, something like you're feeling some wear and tear on your joints. You've been focused on doing this type of training. I encourage you to try this type of training for the next 6 weeks. And this is how you need to minimize like the confounding variables and control for what you're doing. And then we'll see how you feel at the end of this. So take some, tried and true methods, don't go and practice fringe, biohacking stuff. Like start with the fundamentals and self-experiment with that. And then, once you've gotten through those experiments, you've adopted some of those habits and they're showing positive outcomes and you can repeat them, then and only then would you introduce something, more fringe or nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's super valuable to work with someone who has had experience doing it for themselves and or guiding other people through it so that they can point you towards the places where you're likely to potentially get mixed signals, get a little mixed up, maybe have a moment of doubt of whether to continue, and can help, be the voice of reason.
Yeah. Because like you said, I mean, what makes for a good self-experiment is that you got to stick with something long enough to really get good data. And that's where the vast majority of people fail. And I've even failed many times in my past, is like tried something for 2 weeks. I'm like, oh, this ain't working.
Yeah.
I know that going from low carb to high carb, if I had given up in the first 2 weeks, for sure, I would have not seen the benefits because it can take time to make those transitions.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I started eating just more calories in a reverse diet self-experimentation, there was a lot of like early digestive distress. And it was like, ooh, like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, right.
And it was super tough. You feel like your body's never going to like adapt to what you're trying to throw at it. But then if someone says to you like, no, like just stick with it, like you're going to be good in like another week or two. You're like, oh, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's our time for this week. Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you've got questions on, any of the self-experiments that I have done, send them in, DM us over at Satya Khan or Marcus Philly on Instagram.
Yeah.
See you next time.